Everyone's seen it by now. Future and 21 Savage didn't just stumble into a quick misunderstanding. They drifted into one of those quiet, uncomfortable sagas that doesn't need shouting to feel tense. The kind of situation where nothing is said outright, yet everything somehow feels exposed. Because once lyrics get dissected, timelines are re-examined, and old interviews resurface, fans don't miss a thing. What might have once slipped under the radar or been brushed off suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Especially when the internet starts piecing things together faster than anyone can redirect the narrative. And now there's one heavy question sitting at the center of it all. Can Latto and 21 Savage actually make it through this, now that cheating rumors aren't just hushed speculation, but public conversation? No one expected a love triangle to quietly turn into the rumored root of that brief tension between Future and 21. Yet somehow, that's exactly where the story seems to land. And once fans believe they've uncovered something real, they don't let go. They latch on, tugging at every loose detail until the picture feels complete, whether the artists like it or not. At first glance, everything appeared harmless. There was a subtle moment of awkwardness online between Future and 21 Savage. Nothing dramatic. No diss tracks. No direct callouts. Just an energy shift, something slightly off, that people couldn't quite shake. A few low-key tweets surfaced. Some carefully phrased posts followed. Nothing reckless, but calculated enough to make fans pause, reread, and ask, wait, why does it feel like they're competing over Atlanta's top spot? Then, just as quickly, the tension seemed to evaporate. Both artists re-emerged with composed, unbothered energy, moving as if whatever issue existed had already been resolved behind the scenes. Apologies were exchanged. Brotherhood was reaffirmed. Even FaceTime screenshots made their way online, proof that everything was supposedly back to normal. So, on the surface, it looked like the chapter had closed. But anyone who knows how this goes understands one thing: when rappers rush to say there's no beef, fans immediately start asking the question no one wants to answer. So when people started asking, alright, then what was that really about, that's when Latto's name quietly entered the picture, and once it did, it refused to leave. It wasn't loud or dramatic at first. It just sat there, lingering in the background, reshaping how everything else looked. By now, most fans already know the long-running rumors linking Latto and 21 Savage. The timelines line up a little too neatly. Lyrics feel a bit too on the nose. Public appearances overlap in ways that don't seem accidental. Nothing has ever been officially confirmed, but nothing has been firmly denied either. At this point, it's one of hip-hop's most open secrets. That is, until Latto casually cracked the door open herself during a recent street interview, confirming what many already assumed. So when fans began wondering whether a woman sat at the center of the tension between Future and 21 Savage, Latto was the first name that clicked into place. And then came the lyrics. This is where things shifted from speculation to obsession. Listeners immediately locked onto Future's track Brazier, dissecting lines that felt far too specific to dismiss as coincidence. Bars about riding with a female rapper, writing her verses, elevating her profile, and then that slick wordplay referencing mulatto, the name Latto once used before rebranding. That detail alone raised eyebrows. Now, to be fair, ambiguity has always been part of Future's DNA. His career thrives on blurred lines and emotional fog. He's never been about crystal-clear storytelling. But let's also be honest, artists operating at his level don't casually drop loaded references without intent. Lyrics don't need to name names to feel personal. They just need to land at the right moment. And these did. Once those bars resurfaced, fans did what they always do: they went digging. Old interviews, archived podcast clips, forgotten soundbites, everything got dragged back into the light. One clip in particular exploded online, Latto laughing on a podcast while casually describing her first time with someone in a car. At the time, it sounded playful and harmless. But placed next to Future's lyrics, it suddenly felt different, especially to those firmly siding with 21 Savage. Latto has always been vocal about valuing privacy. She said her relationships aren't hidden from the people who matter, but she doesn't owe the public access. She's even joked about keeping a marriage or a child secret just to keep the internet guessing. For a while, that approach worked. Her personal life stayed mostly under her control. But privacy in hip-hop has an expiration date. Once lyrics, timelines, and appearances start overlapping, secrecy starts leaking. And Latto repeatedly bringing up her body count didn't help cool curiosity, it fueled it. Fans became even more invested, digging deeper either to prove her image wrong or confirm the mythos built around her. That's when the theory fully formed. If Latto and Future allegedly crossed paths at some point, and Latto was also involved with 21 Savage around the same time, then suddenly the tension between the two men didn't feel random anymore. It felt personal. Nothing was proven. Nothing confirmed. But it was enough to set the internet on fire. Then things got even murkier. Was this actually cheating in the traditional sense? After all, 21 Savage is still legally married on paper. Depending on how you frame it, everyone involved could technically be crossing lines, or no one might be at all. The more likely scenario? Some kind of open or undefined relationship that only became an issue once real emotions entered the picture. Because often, it's not what happened that hurts most, it's who it happened with. It's entirely possible 21 Savage wasn't upset about Latto seeing other people in general, but about which person this time. Ego, loyalty, and pride matter far more in relationships than people like to admit. And Future isn't just any rapper, he's built an entire legacy around emotional entanglements that never end quietly. That context makes 21 Savage's online behavior even more telling. After the brief fallout, he went on a visible tweeting run, calling for peace, urging unity, pushing growth, encouraging others to squash beef. What he didn't do was publicly defend Latto. Silence doesn't automatically mean guilt, but it does communicate something. People trying to protect a relationship usually work to contain narratives, not allow ones that make them look embarrassed or sidelined to grow unchecked. Instead, speculation ran wild, and no one stepped in to stop it. Not 21. Not Latto. Not Future. And in music culture, silence doesn't quiet rumors. It amplifies them. Ironically, this whole situation may say more about how serious Latto and 21 Savage were than anything else. If it were casual, nobody would care this much. There wouldn't be spiraling theories or lingering awkwardness. These reactions only happen when feelings are real. At the core of it all is a simple truth: privacy only works when both people are aligned. Once that alignment cracks, everything spills out. And then there's Future, the wild card. If whatever happened was truly in the past, why does it still feel so alive? Time usually dulls emotions. Memories fade. Heat cools. But this doesn't feel faded, it feels sharpened. The lyrics don't sound reflective. They sound current. Like a story that stopped mid-thought instead of ending. That kind of energy doesn't come from something resolved. It comes from something still sitting heavy in the chest. Still pulling. Still unresolved. And the most telling part? None of it feels forced. The emotions don't sound recycled for clout. They sound lived in. Fresh. Like someone still trying to make sense of what it meant. It doesn't sound like regret. It sounds like unfinished business. It also helps to remember exactly who Future has always shown himself to be. He's never been someone who quietly disconnects once emotions enter the picture. Subtlety has never been his lane. When he wants something, he leans in. When he senses distance, replacement, or loss, he reacts. Not by retreating, but by expressing, through music, through timing, through decisions that say far more than a carefully worded statement ever could. Seen through that lens, this situation starts to feel less like recycled gossip and more like a delayed emotional response to something that never fully ended internally. Because real closure has a certain calm to it. Even when people don't speak publicly, you can feel when a chapter is finished. There's a softness, a quiet acceptance. What's unfolding now feels nothing like that. The energy is tight. Reactive. Charged. That alone suggests something unresolved is still in motion. There's also a strong chance this has nothing to do with clout, competition, or optics, no matter how quickly people default to those explanations. Reducing complicated emotions to strategy is easier than admitting that feelings might be driving the narrative. But what if this wasn't just a moment to him? What if Latto wasn't a phase or a passing spark, but a real possibility in his mind? That changes the entire dynamic. Because when someone who isn't used to emotional permanence suddenly feels it, the fallout isn't neat. It doesn't fade quietly. It lingers, resurfaces, and shows up at inconvenient times. If that's the case, then this isn't something that simply cools off. It evolves. It finds new ways to express itself when it hasn't been resolved. That's why certain sentiments hit harder than they seem on the surface, especially lines about running from love when it gets complicated, or wanting something unconditional. Those words don't sound like indifference. They sound like disappointment. Like someone still searching for something they didn't receive. People who don't care don't speak that way. They don't frame love like a loss. Yes, some say whatever allegedly happened is old news. And on a calendar, maybe it is. But emotions don't follow dates. Situations don't resurface unless they still carry weight. Feelings don't return fully intact unless they were never really gone. If everything were settled, the response wouldn't feel this heavy, this cautious, like everyone is stepping around something fragile that could crack open at any moment. Then there's the silence. Silence can mean many things, but here it reads as complexity. When people are truly over something, they tend to dismiss it loudly. They joke. They minimize. They shut it down. What we're seeing instead is restraint, and restraint usually comes from knowing that saying too much could reveal more than intended. That carefulness suggests there's still something to lose, even if no one is ready to name it. If this were purely about attention, the narrative would be cleaner. Clearer cues. Sharper messaging. Easy storylines for the public to follow. Instead, everything feels layered and occasionally contradictory, emotional in ways that don't align with a publicity strategy. That's often the biggest indicator that something is real. Real feelings don't package themselves neatly. They spill. They overlap. They leave uncomfortable gaps. Pride plays a major role here too, something people tend to underestimate. When someone who's accustomed to being wanted starts to feel replaceable, it cuts deeper than jealousy. It shakes identity. And when identity is rattled, people don't walk away quietly. They reflect. They react. They try to reclaim meaning, sometimes through art, sometimes through presence, sometimes through timing that feels just a little too intentional to ignore. There's also the matter of choice. Being wanted is one thing. Being chosen is another. If he didn't just desire Latto but saw her as a genuine choice, and then felt that choice slip away or get taken from him, that's not easy to process. Especially for someone who's never had to sit with that kind of emotional loss for long. What complicates everything further is the absence of confirmation. Ambiguity creates space. And in that space, speculation grows. Clear answers strip stories of power, unanswered questions let them expand. Right now, nothing is denied, nothing is confirmed, and everything feels possible. That's why the energy feels unfinished, because it is. Maybe that's why this keeps resurfacing. Not because the audience refuses to move on, but because the people involved haven't fully done so either. Because beneath the surface, there's still something unsaid. Something unresolved. Something that never received the clarity it needed to rest. Until that happens, this won't feel like a closed chapter. It'll feel like a story paused mid-verse. And whether this eventually fades back into quiet speculation or grows into something more, one thing is clear, this isn't a random echo from the past. It's proof that some connections don't end cleanly. They linger. They resurface. They ask questions long after the moment has passed. And until those questions are answered, the tension remains, the energy alive, the story unfinished. Because it all began the way these stories usually do, softly. A line here. A pause there. A lyric that didn't shout but stayed with you. Words that made you rewind not because they were catchy, but because they felt too specific. Too familiar. And anyone who's watched this culture long enough knows artists rarely speak by accident, especially not those who've lasted, who understand that every word, every silence, every look is part of a larger conversation. Music doesn't always exist in a vacuum. Sometimes it's metaphor. Sometimes it's performance. But sometimes it's a release valve, the safest place to tell the truth without fully confessing. So when lines about loyalty, blurred boundaries, and fractured trust began appearing, people didn't need official confirmation. They felt it. In the comments. In the tone. In the way conversations shifted from tagging to whispering. Then came the interviews, not explosive, not scandalous, just revealing in hindsight. Casual laughter about moments that didn't feel casual at all. Answers that sidestepped clarity. Smiles that didn't quite reach the eyes. At the time, it read as confidence, discretion, control. But time has a way of stripping away polish. And when it does, what's left isn't image, it's intent. And it wasn't limited to a single interview or one offhand comment. It was a pattern. The same ideas resurfacing again and again, across different conversations, different platforms, months apart. Independence being stressed just a little too forcefully. Loyalty explained in ways that felt oddly precise. Jokes that landed strangely, then got brushed off with quick laughter. On their own, none of it proved anything. But taken together, it started to feel intentional, like breadcrumbs scattered just far enough apart to avoid accountability, yet close enough to trace a path. At the same time, the music kept speaking. And if anything, it grew more confident. More deliberate. Still no names, still no direct admissions, but the imagery tightened. Situations were circled repeatedly, not rushed, not abandoned. Fans noticed the parallels almost immediately. Lyrics lining up eerily well with circulating rumors. Lines that sounded less like creative exaggeration and more like personal confession wrapped in melody. Even collaborations began to feel charged, as if subtext was doing the heavy lifting. When artists known for coded expression start moving in sync, people don't ignore it, not because they crave drama, but because experience has taught them that silence is rarely empty. Then behavior stepped in to reinforce the tension. Public appearances lost their ease. Interactions felt restrained. Social media activity became a language of its own, subtle enough to deny, but clear enough to spark conversation. An unfollow here. A cryptic like there. Choosing absence at moments where presence once felt guaranteed. Fans did what they always do, replaying clips, lining up timelines, filling in gaps. Some dismissed it as overanalysis. Others recognized the familiar rhythm. They'd seen this story play out before, just with different names. Even with all that, denial still had room to breathe. It always does. Ambiguity is fertile ground for plausible explanations, and for a while, everything lived there, in that gray space where nothing is confirmed and nothing is denied. No statements. No clarifications. Just vibes, whispers, and the persistent feeling that something was being carefully avoided. Because truth doesn't always arrive in clean headlines or polished apologies. Sometimes it hides in what people refuse to say, in what they guard too tightly, in the space between disclosure and deflection. But this doesn't feel like a mystery meant to fade quietly. Something has shifted. The silence feels heavier now. Less neutral. People aren't just speculating anymore, they're waiting. Waiting to see if Latto eventually breaks the quiet and addresses what's been circling for months. Not with humor. Not with sidesteps. But with something resembling clarity, even if it's only her version of it. At the same time, attention has turned toward 21 Savage. Not because anyone expects an emotional outburst, but because restraint can be just as revealing. People are watching to see whether this is something he can absorb privately, compartmentalize, and move past, or whether it crosses a boundary he won't overlook. His silence isn't passive. It's deliberate. And in a culture addicted to instant reactions, choosing not to speak can echo louder than shouting. And then there's Future, hovering at the edges like a narrator who never quite steps into frame. Will he lean further into the speculation, letting the music continue to do the talking? Or will he remain distant, allowing reports and interpretations to swirl without ever confirming or denying anything? History suggests he understands the power of ambiguity. He's perfected the art of letting listeners project their own truths onto his work. Sometimes, that's far more effective than a direct explanation. What makes this moment compelling isn't just the potential fallout, it's the tension of an unresolved truth. Everyone senses there's more beneath the surface, that what's visible is only an outline, not the full picture. In that space, people fill in the blanks with their own experiences, assumptions about loyalty, fame, and the cost of keeping things quiet to protect an image. Because this isn't really about lyrics, interviews, or social media gestures. It's about how public figures manage private complications under constant observation. It's about how long branding can shield reality. About how silence, when stretched too far, begins to feel less like privacy and more like avoidance. And about the uncomfortable truth that sometimes, everyone already knows, you're just the last one to say it out loud. So now comes the waiting. Not for screenshots or exposés, but for acknowledgement. For someone to confirm what's been hanging in the air, or to shut it down so convincingly that the conversation finally loses oxygen. Until then, every move will be analyzed. Every lyric reconsidered. Every pause assigned meaning. Because once people believe a truth is being withheld, they don't stop listening. They lean in. And maybe that's the real story, not whether the rumors are true or false, but how quickly people learn to read between the lines. How silence became suspect. How art turned into evidence. How behavior spoke louder than statements ever could. One thing is certain though, the possibilities here are wide open. And whatever comes next, trust me, most people aren't ready for it.